Good day everyone, and welcome to this endless Mistform tank build for PvP. This is a bit of a follow-up to the Cyrodiil Angler build that I had before. Cyrodiil Angler right now has a set in it, Battalion Defender, that doesn't drop. It's probably going to get fixed at some point, but in the meantime it's hard to get this build, so I do want to mention this build as a bit of a follow-up to that, an alternative, even though it is maybe not as universally applicable to every class in the game as Cyrodiil Angler was, but have this as an alternative in the meantime. So for starters, this build is also available on the website esopvpbuilds.com. You can find that in the description. The premise of this build is quite simple. You basically stay in Mistform, Blood Mist forever, and you do this with two ways. First of all, you have enough Magicka sustain on this build to stay in Mistform forever, and secondly, you also receive a lot of healing and damage reduction and shields in this build, which allows you to not die in Mistform while it's active as well. And this premise is achieved through a bunch of different mechanics, passive mechanics that work hand in hand with each other that I will go over in this video. And then at the end I will also give a couple of gameplay tips and additional tips to this build. It's intended as a fun tank to play, a 0 APM build where you just stand and watch it happen. Maybe there are better tanks out there that you can run, but this is definitely one of the most fun ones I have ever played. So starting off with the sets, I have two 5-piece sets. The first one is Thorax Pact and the second one is Desert Rose. Starting off with Desert Rose, this set is going to be very important to give me the necessary Magicka sustain while in Mistform. As you can see in the 5-piece bonus, it gives me some Magicka back every 4 seconds. This is a tank build, so it will continuously proc. You don't really have to worry about the proc chance, and this allows me to stay in Mistform forever, together with the Combustion passive from Heavy Armor that you can see right here. Constitution passive. This together with Desert Rose is going to proc while in Mistform as well, not like your Magicka sustain that gets disabled, and this way you can stay in Mistform for a long time. On top of that, I will go over the enchants real quick too. I do have infused spell damage enchants, I will return to that later, but if you want more Magicka sustain, you can also go for the cost reduction, Magicka cost reduction enchants. This will allow you to have a reduced cost on your Blood Mist, which will help sustain even more, but personally I don't need that on top of the Desert Rose and Constitution passive. Now to the second 5-piece set, I have Thorax Pact. Thorax Pact is, on the 5-piece bonus, going to increase the potency and the frequency of my enchantments, and that's very important, together with the infused trait on the lightning staff, to proc the hardening enchant. Now the hardening enchant is going to give me a damage shield. This damage shield is not super big, but it's big enough to be noticeable, and of course it is very tanky because we are in Mistform, and Mistform has a damage reduction that also applies to damage shields that you cast on yourself. Now, how do you cast this damage shield? Of course, you don't light attack or have weapon abilities while in Mistform. The way this happens is through a CP passive called Cutting Defense. It can be found here in the bottom right of the blue CP tree. Basically, Cutting Defense is going to deal a little bit of damage to melee attackers, and this damage is going to proc weapon enchantments and poisons. And that of course includes the hardening enchant on the lightning staff. And then for the rest of the gear, I simply complete it with the Open Soul Ring. This is a 1-bar build because you cannot bar swap. And then finally a Vulcan Scoria Pauldron. This is going to give me some extra penetration, and that together with the infused spell damage enchants and the Magicka enchants on the gear and the lightning staff is going to increase the damage of Blood Mist. Why is this important? Because the only healing I'm getting from this build is from the Blood Mist skill mechanic, where it deals some damage in an AoE around me and I heal based on the damage done. So the more spell damage you have and the more penetration you have, the harder this skill is going to hit, and the harder this skill is going to hit, the more healing you will get. Then on top of that, with the shields that you will continuously proc, there's some more shields that I will go over later on. You will have quite a lot of survivability while in Mistform. And then you have some natural tankiness due to passives of the class and also impenetrable gear and such. It's also full heavy armor. It's 6 heavy, 1 light armor. And then this all together will create quite a bit of passive defense on top of the Mistform 75% damage reduction as well. Now for the skills, obviously I have Blood Mist first. You can see the cost here is kind of high, it's more than 1k magicka per second, but it is still covered by the Constitution and Desert Rose passive for me, so I'm quite happy with that. As I mentioned before, in case you are having issues still with magicka sustain, you can just go and slot some magicka cost reduction enchantments on your jewelry as well. Then the next skills are Spirit Guardian, Mortal Coil, Resistant Flesh, Beckoning Armor, and Barrier. As you see, I'm a Necromancer on this build. I have tried this build on other classes as well, but I didn't find it as effective because the Necromancer passive skills and active skills are really good for this build. They go hand in hand with it all, and we'll go over that a bit more now. For starters, Spirit Guardian is going to give me another 10% damage reduction, which will of course make me even tankier. Then Mortal Coil. This will give me some more sustain. As you can see, you restore 170 magicka and stamina every 2 seconds while cycling the corpse. And on top of that, it's going to give me a little bit more healing from Blood Mist, so that's super useful to have. Then Resistant Flesh. Now, Resistant Flesh, of course, is not something you can cast in Blood Mist. You cannot cast any skill in Blood Mist, but sometimes if I get on low health while in Blood Mist, I will use this skill to have a bit of a burst heal together with the potion as well. I will explain that a bit more in a bit. And then Beckoning Armor. I am running Open Soul in this build, so of course I do already have Major Resolve, but this skill I have for the secondary effect that will pull enemies towards you once every 2 seconds while this ability is active. And what that is going to do is bring them in melee range. If they are in melee range, they might stay in melee range or they might not, but in any case you will have more ticks of Blood Mist because it will damage enemies only in melee range, and if they are pulled in by Beckoning Armor, you will get a little bit more healing. And then the ultimate is Barrier. I found this to be the best defensive ultimate for this build because it gives you a big damage shield, and this damage shield is going to benefit from the Mistform damage reduction as well. So it's a bit of a panic ultimate in case you do happen to get low on health while in Mistform. You can just cast this, maybe cast a burst heal as well if you want to, or just immediately go back into Blood Mist and enjoy the healing that can just tick freely while you have a damage shield on you. Next up for the champion points. Starting off with the blue tree, I have Cutting Defense, of course, as I mentioned before. This is very important to proc your enchant. And then the other CPs are Focused Mending, Biting Aura, and From the Brink. From the Brink is yet another damage shield that you can apply on yourself. This one is going to proc once you are under 25% health. The healing that you do through Blood Mist is going to proc this passive as well, and it can be found here in the Mastered Curation subsection. Then for the red CPs, I have Bastion, Boundless Vitality, Pain's Refuge, and Celerity. Pain's Refuge is going to be fully active to 20% all the time if you're tanking, so that's a big amount of damage reduction as well. Celerity is going to allow you to kite a bit more with Mistform, which is nice to have. I will talk about that more in a bit. And then Bastion is very important as well, because it will make your damage shield stronger, which is a very important part of the defense of this build. Boundless Vitality simply to get a little bit more health, because there's not really any other very useful CP passives out there for the red tree. Then for the race, the attributes and such, you can see the stats here. The spell damage is decently high for a tank build, as is the penetration and the maximum magicka. The attributes are fully into maximum magicka. In case you're not yet at 30k health, you can stack some attributes into health as well to get that 30k health mark. I am a high elf on this build. Breton would probably be ideal because it reduces the cost of Mistform, which is super useful to have, and gives a bunch of resistances as well. But high elf is not bad either, because it has a little passive that gives you another 5% damage reduction while you're channeling an ability, which includes Mistform, and some extra magicka and spell damage, which further increases the damage of Blood Mist. Regardless, the Mundus here is the Lover. The Lover is going to give me extra penetration, which again will make Blood Mist hit harder. The food is Bewitched Sugar Skulls. You can also go for a pure magicka and health food, but I do find the extra stamina a bit useful, because sometimes I do have to cast a roll dodge on this build if I am, for example, negated, but more about that later. And then Vampire Stage 3, obviously you need a Vampire for this build, and I'm on Stage 3 to get the Undeath passive. You can also go Stage 4, but that would further increase the flame damage you take by another 7%, and I don't really want to deal with that. The potions I use on this build are Essence of Health. They are armor potions and are going to give me extra spell resistance and physical resistance on top of Major Resolve. And I also use the extra healing this gives as a bit of a burst heal. Sometimes when I'm in Mistform and I'm low on health, I will cast a potion that will bring me out of Mistform and immediately follow that up with Resistant Flesh, and that way I get a pretty big burst heal. And then immediately I will go in Mistform again with the extra health that I have. Then another gameplay tip, one of the biggest counters against this build is Negate, because Negate will take you out of Mistform. So when that happens, it's important to roll dodge. That's why I have that bit of extra stamina. And if you roll dodge, you can also follow that up with a jump that will keep the momentum. And then you'll be out of the range of the Negate and you can go into Elusive Mist again, maybe after casting a barrier or a resistant flash as well. And that's a bit how you counter the counter to this build, being Negate. Now, Negate can come from players, but it also comes from guards, so you do have to be careful while fighting guards in keeps and such, because I think it's the healer guards will have a Negate ability that they will cast on you as well. However, there is a bit of a risk and reward mechanic involved to dealing with guards here, because even though they can cast Negate on you, and you have to watch out for that, they also heal you more, because if you damage a guard with Blood Mist, it will, I think, deal more damage or give you more healing due to how Battle Spirit works. So if you manage to stack up some guards in melee range, for example the one-handed and shield guards will give you a lot of extra healing if you stay in range of them. Of course, the one-handed and shield guards, if I'm not mistaken, also have a separate puncture ability that does increase your damage taken. So I would advise getting a bunch of you on top, and then you can really stay on Mistform a lot longer. It will be shown in some of these clips as well in gameplay that when I have guards on me and Blood Mist is sticking on them, that I will receive a lot of extra healing as compared to while I only have players on me. Another gameplay tip here is to keep enemies in melee range. So this is done by beckoning armor already, but your movement matters a lot as well. If you are near a tree or near an LOS, you can use that to your advantage by stacking people in melee range on top of you, and that way your Blood Mist will tick on more enemies and you will receive more healing from it. It is important to keep that in mind, because if everybody is attacking you from range, you are just taking damage and you're not receiving any healing or proccing your enchants, both of which will only proc in melee range. And then a last gameplay tip is that this build sort of scales with the amount of enemies you fight. If you're fighting 10 or 20 enemies, you will receive a lot more healing and a lot more shields than if you were fighting only 1 or 2 enemies. But that's not really a problem, because 1 or 2 enemies will often not be able to kill you anyway. If you just use your Mistform and your healing smartly, you can go in Mistform in a bit while they are in LOS and they are stacked on you on melee range. And if in case that you drop low on health, you can just cast a quick resistant flash or maybe one of the buffs here, and then go back into Mistform again. Regardless though, often it's not even needed to do all that, and you can just stay in Mistform permanently. I have some clips like that. The skills here are nice to keep up, are a nice boost to this build, but they are not 100% necessary, and if you want to go for purely the fun factor, you can just go in Mistform, let go of your keyboard and mouse and enjoy what unfolds. So that's it for the build. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay, and if you use this build yourself as well, I hope you'll have a fun time in Cyrodiil too. This build has been available on Patreon before for a couple of months already, so if you wish to support the channel or enjoy more early release on builds, do consider Patreon. I would greatly appreciate that. Again, you can also find the build on ESOPvpbuilds.com on the website linked in the description. Thank you for watching this video and have a good time. See ya!
Forbidden knowledge, he's clicking and
I
using
clicked,
buttons.
I'm sorry, I clicked.
Ah, shit!
I will now use the secret power of LOS.
Oh no! His secret has been found.
The two colossus are fighting each other. And I'm just standing in between a puddle of mist.
They're hitting you, maybe.
Yeah, actually, they probably...
PvP.
This is so funny.
Update 35.